Hi everybody, I'm Electro Dr. Funman Fong. This is CM3261 and now let's move on to nitrogen cycle, right? Nitrogen makes up about 78% of our atmosphere by mass and it's the sixth most abundant element on Earth, right? And nitrogen is an essential element in biomolecules such as proteins, DNA, RNA, and thus is a very vital, important to us, the humans, organisms, and other living creatures. So this nitrogen cycle is split up into four parts. Right? First, we talk about how nitrogen moves. Second, it be a nitrogen fixation. Third is the nitrogen and denitrification, as well as fourth, the human impact on the nitrogen cycle. Right? So firstly, we talk about how nitrogen moves right in the ecosystem. So first, nitrogen, we know that it composes about 79% in the air, right? The rest consists of oxygen, CO2, and other gases. So this N2, if you recall your NN triple bond here, it is really chemically inert because of the high activation energy that you use to break this covalent bond. And we are unable to retrieve this nitrogen just merely from the atmospheric N2, right? So you need to have some assistance, right? From where? From lightning, from a highly specialized bacteria, or even kind of human intervention. So nitrogen, therefore, is relatively scarce in the lithosphere and hydrosphere. Right? But once it undergoes the right chemical reactions, that means we activate it, right? It becomes biologically active and is available to organisms and then act as the potent fertilizer. Very powerful. Right? But the thing is scarcity makes it the biological active, for nitrogen being a very bad limiting factor for plant growth because most of it through even the respiration now, N2 is just harmless and as an inert gas. Now next we take a look at the nitrogen fixation, right? So to make nitrogen biologically active, the gas N2 needs to be fixed, right? Some modification or combined with the hydrogen to form ammonia. Right, so ammonia NH3, right, weak base, it dissolves in water to form ammonium ions, right, NH4 plus, and then because it's ionic form here, soluble in water, uptake by the plants. Right? And this is accomplished by the intense energy of the lightning strikes. So lightning also splits nitrogen, right, and cause it to be more active. When air on the top layers of the soil come in close contact with particular types of nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Right? So these nitrogen-fixing bacteria live in a mutualistic relationship with many types of plants such as soybeans or legumes. You can give this example in the test, providing them with nutrients by converting the nitrogen N2 into a usable form, right? So some farmers, they will nourish the soils by planting crops that can host this nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So they identify these plants, right, that will keep and host this nitrogen-fixing bacteria and put them alongside near to the crops, right? So you can activate the soil and make sure there's a sufficient N nitrogen inside the ecosystem. So the nitrogen and this denitrification specialized bacteria can perform denitrification in the process where the NH4 plus ions are converted into the nitrite ions, the NO2 negative. And when they are then being converted into NO3 minus ions, the nitrate ions, right? This is the process here. Right? NH4 plus, NO2 minus, NO3 minus. So plants can uptake these ions that also become available right after the atmospheric deposition on soil or in water or after the application of the nitrate-based fertilizers. Now next, the animals, right? How then the animals, not us but animals, obtain the nitrogen? How do they obtain them, right? So they consume the plants, right? And the plants that we talked about just now, they gain the nitrogen here. So it's about the transmission of nitrogen from a soil to the plant, and then the animals consume it, right, or eating other animals. So the decomposers, right, they obtain nitrogen from dead or decaying plants or animal matters, and from animal urines and feces, right. Those also contain nitrogen. I mean ammonia. That's why it's not very smelly, not very fragrant. Some people call it stinks because of ammonia. It has a very pungent smell. But once the decomposers possess the nitrogen-rich compounds, right, they can release the NH4 plus ions, making them available to the nitrifying bacteria, right, in soil and water to nitrogen gas, right, in a multi-step process. So this denitrification therefore completes the cycle by releasing the N2 nitrogen back to the atmosphere as a gas. So it's not like, oh, we draw everything from air, N2 goes into NH4 plus, the nitrate, but it's a cycle. We also release back some N2, right, from the NH4 plus. Now, finally, we'll now talk about the human impact on the nitrogen cycle. So, if you read some historical books in chemistry, right, or even mankind, we know that nitrogen fixation is always a bottleneck step that limit the flux. Remember the flux, the term flux, of the nitrogen out into the atmosphere, right? How can we source the nitrogen? Very, very hard because N2 is mostly in the atmosphere, very inert. So this change in the development of the Haber-Bosch process, right, to make ammonia, it was a really key ingredient to making producing modern day explosives and agricultural fertilizers. But unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, you see the Beirut explosions in Lebanon. That was very tragic. We'll talk about it next time. Now, with the Haber-Bosch process, we have effectively doubled the rate of nitrogen fixing on Earth, right? And overwhelm the nature's denitrification abilities. So we can't just use Mother Nature and make the nitrogen biologically active. The human intervention came to play through the Haber-Bosch process, right? And because we have enhanced agriculture due to a higher crop yield, the new fertilizers, contributed to in the past centuries that were able to sustain larger populations because the farmers were becoming more efficient in producing more food, right? The productivity increased. So fixing the atmospheric nitrogen with fertilizers increased the flux of nitrogen from the atmosphere to the Earth's surface. And this flux was enhanced by cultivating the legume crops whose roots, right, can host the nitrogen fixing bacteria. So you see a cycle, it's like a virtual cycles here, right? We are able to create fertilizers through a modern chemical process, the Haber-Bosch process, right? And then we can speed up the growth of legume crops that can host more nitrogen fixing bacteria. So you see the virtual cycle, it just stacks up, right? So we do reduce the nitrogen's return to the air when we destroy all this wetland that filters the nutrients, because wetland plants host the nitrifying bacteria that converts the nitrates back to nitrogen gas, right? So how do you get the bidirectional flux? Wetlands can really mop up a great deal of nitrogen pollution. Now, farming practices, right, speed runoff if not done well, and allow soil erosion. So the nitrogen flows from the farms into the terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem, and leading to nutrients pollution. Too much nutrients, too much of good things is also bad enough, right? Eutrophication and hypoxia. Burning of forests and fields also forces the nitrogen out of the soils and vegetations and into the atmosphere. Don't say sky, atmosphere. So the burning of fossil fuels releases the nitric oxide, or nitrogen monoxide, chemical terms, into the atmosphere where it reacts to form the nitrogen dioxide, NO2. And this is a precursor to nitric acid, HNO3, a key component of acid precipitation, acid rain. So the nitrous oxide, N2O, is released when the anaerobic bacteria breaks down the tremendous volume of the animal waste produced in the agriculture feedlots. So the over-applications, too much, right, applying of the nitrogen-based fertilizers can strip the soil, right, of other essential nutrients such as the calcium and potassium, because the fertilizers flush them out by complexations of precipitation, right? And therefore, it is not good because you also withdraw other metal elements and ions that the plant needs. As a conclusion, that brings us to the end of the nitrogen cycle. Cheers.